Call on Government Order of the Day number 10.
Taranaki iwi Claims Settlement Bill, first reading.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Christopher Finlayson.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Taranaki iwi Claims Settlement Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Maori Affairs Committee to consider the bill. Mr Speaker, in July last year I attended the initialing ceremony for the Taranaki iwi Deed of Settlement at Pukeariki in New Plymouth, and the signing of the deed at the stunning and culturally significant Pukiti in September. There were very large crowds gathered at both those memorable occasions, and I'm sure many of the people, the same people, are here in Parliament today to witness the first reading of this bill. As I said in the Te Atiawa debate just a few minutes ago, it is so appropriate that the first reading for legislation to address the wrongs the Crown has done to Taranaki iwi takes place on 16 March, as it was on 17 March that Crown troops at Waitara fired the first shots in the Taranaki Wars. So to the people of Taranaki iwi, no mai, haere mai. Let me start with a few acknowledgements. I acknowledge those who are in this House today, and I want to mention also those who have passed on over many generations while the iwi pursued justice, and this includes Te Miringa Hauhaia, who sadly passed away during this work. I want to acknowledge the trustees of the Taranaki iwi Trust, the claims leadership team, the negotiators, a very, very talented and distinguished bunch of people. I say that because Mahara Okoroa is with us in the chamber. Jamie Tuta, Toka Walden and Wayne Mulligan, and all iwi members. I want to acknowledge the Chief Crown Negotiator Paul Swain for his work on this settlement. I would actually say more about Paul, but he's getting increasingly worried that I praise him too much in public and that it may harm his reputation in the Labour Party. So I'm going to leave it there. Thanks also to the officials for their work. Some of them have moved on from OTS to TPK. I think I've forgiven them, but it's a pretty mean thing to do to me because they're so good. Mr Speaker, as the history suggests, the journey for Taranaki iwi to settlement stretches back many, many decades. Tribunal hearings were held between 1990 and 1995, and the report was released in June 1996, 20 years ago. The claims were brought to the tribunal as muru me te rupatu, and it describes the confiscation or the plunder of property as punishment for alleged offences, muru, and the conquest or subjugation of the people by government control, ropatu. The tribunal, as we all know, was chaired by Sir Eddie Durie, and he found that Taranaki Māori were dispossessed of their land, their leadership, means of livelihood, personal freedom, and social structure and values. They were denied their rights of autonomy, and as British subjects, their civil rights were removed. For decades, they were subjected to sustained attacks on their property and their person. This statement was in the forefront of the Crown's mind when entering into negotiations with Taranaki iwi, and the Crown knew it had a very long way to go, to address the profound grievances of Taranaki iwi, which I can tell the House are still felt today. Settlement negotiations began in February 2010 when the Crown recognised the mandate of the Taranaki iwi Trust to negotiate the settlement of all of the Taranaki iwi historical treaty claims. As I said, the terms of negotiation were signed on 17 March 2010 and negotiations began. In December 2012, I signed a letter of agreement that outlined the main aspects of the settlement package, and on 5 September 2015 I signed the deed of settlement after it was ratified by members of Taranaki iwi, and that was indeed a very, very moving settlement. Despite there being some pressure, I have to confess on my part, to conclude negotiations as they saw their whanaunga from Ngāruahine and Te Atiawa moving closer to settlement with the Crown, the negotiators held on to their position and did not accept the Crown offer until such time as they were satisfied that their aspirations for Parihaka were being addressed. So again, I commend the fortitude of the negotiators, because it's their determination that led to the formation of Kawe Tutaki, set up to provide advice and guidance to the Crown about how the Crown can support the people and the legacy of Parihaka. This group carried out its work alongside but separate to Taranaki iwi's treaty settlement. They were ably led by Dame Tariana Turia and Jim Bolger, and they submitted their report to the Minister of Māori Development and me last year with the support of the Parihaka community. I'm now working up those proposals and will be shortly talking to my Cabinet colleagues about Parihaka based around the recommendations of Kawe Tutaki. And I look forward in the not too distant future to announcing initiatives that I believe will help produce a final reconciliation between the Crown and Parihaka. Mr. Speaker, I can't really talk about Parihaka without taking a moment to reflect on the history that sits behind the settlement legislation. Of course, you know it so well because you represent much of the relevant area in the House. When Māori and the Crown signed the treaty in 1840, the Crown intended for Māori to be treated fairly and honourably, but the Crown hasn't upheld its obligations as treaty partner, and Taranaki iwi have been hurt as a result. That hurt stems from a history marked by the Crown's serious and repeated failures to live up to its obligation to Taranaki iwi under the treaty. The history of Taranaki iwi is so evidently a history of hardship, of suffering, and of resilience. And I'm grateful to the very kind words of Kelvin Davis, but every time we have a debate, it is important to read into the permanent record of the House exactly what happened before we talk about the settlement itself. In 1860, the Crown's purchase of land at Waitara led to war between Taranaki Māori and the Crown. Crown forces employed scorched earth tactics which destroyed Taranaki iwi kāinga, pātaka and cultivations. As we know, peace was officially negotiated in 1861, but the Crown forces remained in the region. In May 1863, war resumed, and in the following years, Crown forces again destroyed Taranaki iwi settlements and cultivations. These people suffered severe distress and hardship, and many lost their lives. In 1865, the Crown proclaimed 1.2 million acres of Taranaki land to be confiscated, including all of the Taranaki iwi rohe not yet purchased. The following year, a process to compensate loyal Māori for the confiscation of their land was established, but large tracts of Taranaki iwi lands had already been allocated to military settlers, and almost all of the land eventually returned was granted, as we know, under individualised title, extinguishing customary tenure. In 1865, Taranaki iwi responded to the plight of war and Crown acts of violence with an alternative non-violent action. And we know the story about the establishment of the settlement at Parihaka in the very heart of Taranaki iwi rohe. It became a flourishing community guided by principles of discipline, of faith and non-violence to resist further land loss and promote Māori independence. And I was so pleased and honoured to be able to visit Parihaka last year and talk to the community. Over the years, the population grew steadily as those who had been dispossessed by war and confiscation sought refuge. During the 1870s, the Parihaka community engaged in a campaign of passive resistance against Crown attempts to make more Maori land available for European settlement. In 1879 and 1880, the Crown set aside the normal processes of law and detained many Taranaki iwi people without trial in the South Island. And then on 5 November 1881, Crown troops invaded Parihaka, dismantled the settlement and forcibly removed many of its inhabitants. Te Whiti and Tuhu were arrested and held without trial for many months. Over the following days, some 1,600 men, women and children, not originally from Parihaka, were made to return to their native homes. Houses and cultivations were systematically destroyed, stock driven away or killed. Maori gatherings were restricted and entry to Parihaka was regulated by a pass system. This was a veritable assault on the human rights of Taranaki iwi, but Mr. Speaker, even at the darkest hour, this iwi remained staunchly committed to those principles of passive resistance. At the day we signed the deed of settlement, the women of Parihaka composed a poi performed at the deed signing, and it described their experience of being raped and assaulted by the troops. Actually, that poi hadn't been performed for many years, and it was an extraordinary moment, to say the least, in the course of that settlement. So, Mr. Speaker, it's a testament to the pragmatism and the generosity of Taranaki iwi that in agreeing to this settlement, the iwi have foregone full compensation for the loss and prejudice they've suffered as a result of the Crown's acts and accepted the need to put the hurt of the past behind them. As I mentioned earlier, Taranaki iwi and the Crown signed the deed of settlement in September. Key elements of the redress include that agreed historical account, a very, very important part of any settlement. Financial and commercial redress of $70 million, the opportunity to purchase specific Crown properties through deferred selection and the right of first refusal, the vesting of 14 properties in fee simple and 15 properties subject to reserve status, the joint vesting of Ngā Sugarloaf Islands in Taranaki iwi and Te Atiawa, statutory acknowledgements over 25 sites of significance and deeds of recognition over 14 sites, the option to purchase specific South Taranaki District Council properties if they become surplus, and a proposed model for iwi representation on 2 standing committees in the Regional Council alongside Te Atiawa and Ngā Ruahine. So, Mr. Speaker, I certainly hope this package will contribute to mending the relationship between the Crown and Taranaki iwi that has been so badly damaged in the past. Of course, the treaty settlement grievances of Taranaki iwi won't be fully addressed, and Mr. Tarakatni adverted to this, until Maunga Taranaki has been settled. Discussions around settlement redress for the Maunga will be the subject of collective negotiations with the 8 iwi of Taranaki. Ngāti Maru are very close to having their mandate for negotiations. Whenever I see Holden Hohaia, I ask him how it's going. It's getting close. It's getting very close indeed. And I look forward to the day later in the year when we'll be all able to come to the table to discuss the regional settlement. To conclude, Mr. Speaker, back in the 19th century, Taranaki iwi responded to the plight of war and Crown acts of violence with passive resistance, following the leadership of Te Whiti o Rongomai and other prominent Taranaki rangatira. At the time, proclamations known as Te Haiata, the New Dawn, and Te Tau Ariki, a time of prominence, were made to signal an end to the bloodshed and conflict and the beginning of a new struggle for self-determination through non-violent action. And I certainly hope that today signifies a new dawn for Taranaki iwi and the beginning of a new relationship with the Crown. And I am sure that the Maori Affairs Select Committee will be dealing with this bill and the Te Atiawa bill as quickly as possible, because I certainly hope, and I hope Daisy Noble doesn't get upset about this, what a great day it would be for this Parliament if we could have the third readings of Taranaki, Te Atiawa and Ngā Ruahine claim settlement bills at the same time, because I think that would truly be a very historic day in the life of our country.
Amen.